Tragedy on a football field. Assassination. Assassination. Drone strike. Failed negotiations. A potential war on a second front. Helicopter crash. Missile barrage. Retaliation. A global trading choke point. Oh, and nuclear weapons. It's a lot to unpack. But let's try to do it in the next 9 minutes or less. Rewind to October 7th, the date of Hamas's surprise attack on Israel. And then fast forward 9 months. In the intervening period, Israel has been at war in Gaza, with Western partners becoming increasingly concerned about the lack of a ceasefire, and there being growing angst on Israel's northern border. With increasing public support for the Palestinian cause in the Arab world, various militant groups have been looking to cash in, both in terms of direct financial offerings and free-flowing recruitment. This explains the Houthis' actions along the Bab el-Mandab Strait, which has led to all sorts of pain in the world of international shipping. But the more recent focus has shifted to Hezbollah's delicate balancing act. Hezbollah is one of the members of Iran's loosely affiliated Axis of Resistance and calls Lebanon home. Since the Gaza war began, the group has attacked Israel in a variety of ways, trying to do just enough to stay relevant in the marketplace of militant groups, while also not inducing Israel to start a second front of the war. Well, July 27th was a real test of that strategy. That evening, a rocket struck a football field in the Golan Heights, a disputed territory on the border with Syria that Israel has administered since the Six-Day War of 1967. 12 were killed, all of whom were Druze Arabs, and most of whom were children. Hezbollah denied responsibility, but Western intelligence found that claim to be dubious. Rather, Hezbollah had messed up, the group knew it, and thus had begun backtracking. Then there was a bit of a quiet period. Too quiet, in fact, for the Wall Street Journal's taste. But that weakness and lack of resolve turned out to be Israel saying, "Hey, can you just give us a few days?" Indeed, the response did come on July 30th, in the form of a missile strike in the suburbs of Beirut. The target was Fuad Shakur, or at least this blurry entity who goes by that name. By most accounts, he is, or was, Hezbollah's second-in-command, and the United States had sought his arrest, dating all the way back to the 1983 Beirut barracks bombings. And somehow, 40 years later, this is still the best image that US intelligence has of him. Anyway, at the time of writing, 4 were dead, including 2 children. Shakur is presumed dead as well, but that is still pending final confirmation. That seemed to be the big story for the week, perhaps with a touch of US airstrikes in Iraq on the side. But Israel, or some unknown entity that publicly does not claim to be Israel, had another ace up its sleeve. Gotta love secrecy in international relations. Here is where things get weird, and we need to begin following 2 parallel processes. Bear with me as we go back to May 19th. Then President of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, was heading back from a trip to Azerbaijan. But his helicopter hit a patch of dense fog within a mountain range, leading to a crash and his death. 2 months later, Iran was set to swear in a new president. Meanwhile, along the other vector, talks had stalled between Israel and Hamas regarding an end to the war in Gaza. Negotiations have been primarily taking place in Qatar, in part because the country itself acts as a neutral-ish third-party arbitrator, and also because Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's political leader, had been living there for the past 5 years. Apparently not wanting to hurt diplomatic relations with Qatar, Israel never assassinated Haniyeh while he was living there. But this is where the parallel tracks now converge. Hamas being a member of the Axis of Resistance, Haniyeh went to Tehran for the inauguration of the new Iranian president. This gave Israel the opportunity to attack him. Israel already has poor diplomatic relations with Iran, or perhaps more accurately, no diplomatic relations at all, so making that worse was not as big of a problem, or at least not at the same level of problem as a Qatar problem, and thus no more Hamas political leader. Under more ordinary political times, I would point out that assassinations disrupt organizational efficiency, and inject new uncertainty about the succeeding leader's preferences. This creates the traditional lines on maps issues like shifting power and preventive war, and miscalculation of optimal peace-preserving demands. My self-respecting academic alter ego has also written about how this can splinter groups, which sometimes leads to more effort put into violence after militants are freed from the bounds of ineffective leadership. But it can also just make everything fall apart. All of that remains true, but I am not sure if it is what we should be focusing on here. Israel has already thoroughly gutted Hamas, and the peace process was seemingly halted anyway. Put differently, these are not normal times. Thus, it is possible for this to break the other way, where whoever assumes political control over Hamas uses it as a fresh opportunity to get out of the war. Yes, on the surface, a brazen assassination seems to invite anger from Hamas's ranks, and seems to inject more chaos into the system. But political players can use chaos as a ladder. Friendly reminder that you need both a substantive disagreement and a bargaining friction for war to happen. Where the bargaining friction lies with Gaza is a good question. But if you are in the camp of, say, Hamas's leadership obtaining personal benefits for continuing the fight, then the assassination resolves the bargaining friction, and thus the war can come to a close. Anyway, it is not like Hamas's foot soldiers have a shortage of motivation aside from an assassination. As for the rest of the aftermath, well, that is about as messy as the steps that got us here. Yes, Israel apparently did not want to inflame tensions with Qatar, but we are only 3 months away from an unprecedented set of Iranian missile strikes on Israel that were seemingly self-sabotaged. Very weird. And we are also only 3 months removed from a relatively targeted response from Israel that went after the defenses of one of Iran's nuclear facilities. Those 3 months have seen relative bilateral peace between Israel and Iran, even as Iran's proxies have continued their attacks. It is worth noting that Iran has not always countered kinetically in response to targeted assassinations on its soil. In fact, Israel has gone after a host of Iranian nuclear scientists over the years. Well, allegedly anyway. In contrast, Haniyeh was a guest on Iranian soil and not an Iranian citizen. But if there was latent domestic demand to start a new series of attacks and responses, well, Israel has just given an open invitation to get them started. Okay, with that, 3 things stand out about the attack and its broader consequences in the bilateral relationship. First, the preliminary reports indicate that the vector of attack was a missile strike. If that is the case, then this is the second consecutive time that Israel has frolicked around in Iran's airspace and not found out, but rather evaded much of any consequence. That matters a great deal because of the second point, Iran's aforementioned nuclear program. As a caveat always worth repeating, reports always seem to suggest that Iran is a moment away from acquiring a nuclear weapon, but still has not. Nevertheless, if intelligence were to indicate that Iran was going to finish the process at a particular set date, then Israel will have to make a decision about whether to militarily intervene to stop it. This will not be an easy task, given that some of Iran's facilities are underground, and thus a quick flyby operation, a la Israel's 1981 strike on Iraq's reactor project, will not be an option. But Iran's inability to control its own airspace tells us that Israel may find such operations more feasible. Of course, that does not mean that they are more likely to happen in practice. Iran can also internalize Israel's ability to intervene and choose not to take the final steps on its nuclear project. Which of those two effects dominates is hard for any of us, as outside observers, to appreciate. The final thought is that Iran is already inhibiting shipping along the Red Sea, with its assistance to Houthi rebels at the sea's southern point. If Iran grows sufficiently frustrated with the global reaction to the situation, the figurative nuclear option, as opposed to the literal one that we just covered, is to double up on the access shutdown by trying to disrupt trade along the Strait of Hormuz. This will not specifically be a problem for Israel, because Israel-affiliated ships are not frequently heading over in that direction. But the strait handles about 20% of the world's oil, and thus even small disruptions there will have serious consequences for everyone else. How that would work, and whether it would be effective, though, is a much, much bigger question. And that is why I plan on doing a very long-form look at it over the next couple of months. And speaking of long-form, join me at 11 a.m. Eastern on Saturday for the longest Lines on Maps extravaganza in the history of this channel. For now, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.